listening to it.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims, the one and only Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims. Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about voice.
Without further ado,
Welcome to the show.
All right, there we are. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and Nikola, welcome. How are you doing?
Not bad. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to have you along. And I was going to say we were expecting Dustin. There has been a slight scheduling issue on my side. These podcasts are coming thick and fast, and so Dustin's unable to make it. But nevertheless, we are very much glad to have you here and excited to dive into the ins and outs of PolyAI. Pick your brains a little bit around your experience. You've been doing this stuff for quite a while, haven't you? The whole kind of voice thing is something that's
we live and breathe voice.
Nice. So it's you have a decent history. We'll get into some of that, and we can discuss your history. I know you spent some time at Apple. You've got well educated in this kind of space, and now with PolyAI doing some really interesting stuff. And so we'll definitely get into all of that. But for people who may not be aware of either yourself or PolyAI, do you want to kind of just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and about what you're up to with PolyAI?
Absolutely. So PolyAI is a London-based conversational AI company, and we build enterprise-grade voice assistants that are capable of providing superhuman customer experience and customer service. About me, not that much of a long story. I got into the whole field when my PhD supervisor, Steve Young, convinced me not to go into investment banking and instead directed me at a guy called Blaise Thompson, who was starting a company called Vocal IQ. And Vocal IQ was another Cambridge spin-out like PolyAI, just 5-6 years ago. And at the time, we were building the world's first self-learning dialogue API. And it was a different time, right? The consumer habits around voice and using voice assistants had not yet formed, at least not to the same extent. You had a very simple version of Siri. There was no Alexa, no Google Assistant. And, we worked with different automotive companies, ended up acquired by Apple to make Siri a bit more conversational. And after a few years there, I left and started PolyAI with two incredible guys who were part of my PhD cohort, Eddie Su and Sean Wen. And both of them are Taiwanese prodigies, went to school together, came to Cambridge. And between the three of us, we did a lot of work on putting the latest generation of deep learning into conversational AI, into creating systems for robust data-driven language understanding, dialogue management, natural language generation. And, when we started PolyAI, we were really focused on kind of like bringing this kind of like new paradigm and the capabilities into, a framework and a company that would provide incredible, as we say, superhuman customer experiences for enterprises, because they actually stand to gain a lot from deploying this kind of technology, but are stuck in, you could call it Stone Age technology. It's actually kind of like from the late 90s, early noughties, where, you've got IVRs, some simple voice IVRs, but we're still really far from having robust, natural voice experiences that are fully automated and feel good, if not better, than a conversation with a very good human agent. So, we're passionate about it. We build really good voice assistants. We want to see them everywhere. We want to unlock human potential, and all of those agents that are stuck in call centers doing simple tasks, we want to move them over to the more complex ones where they can provide a lot more value. And we want to make sure that where technology can work well, and it can work well for a lot of simple and even some very complex transactions, we want to put in things that are, even better than humans, that can work better, faster, day and night, pick up immediately, understand any language, colloquial language, different dialects, understand my last name, which is something that say very few very few people, well, other than you, are able to pronounce.
I told you, my education in watching football comes off every now and then.
No, it's incredible. I'm still in shock. It's the perfect should, the perfect should. It's spectacular, man. So, anyways, yeah, that's my short propaganda spiel about me and kind of like PolyAI. But really excited to be on the podcast, talk about voice, talk about these technologies. It's all we do. We're really passionate about them, and I think we have a lot to say.
Cool. That sounds good. That sounds really good. So, Vocal IQ. When was Vocal IQ acquired by Apple? Did you say?
2015.
2015. Okay. And I don't know what extent you can kind of speak on this, but Apple tend to acquire companies here and there. So obviously Vocal IQ was one of them. They acquired Voices probably just after you might have left there. And they often acquire Pullstring, another one that was probably around about a similar time, maybe it's a bit after. So they always acquire these companies, but the kind of question I always have is, what happens to it? So for Pullstring, my theory was that they would use it the first theory was that they would use it to create design tools for developers that would allow them to build on top of Siri. That didn't transpire. So then I was thinking, well, it might be internal tools that makes the internal teams able to spin up ideas quicker. I don't know whether that's the case or not. With Voices, I thought, well, Voices have got technology that is really sophisticated as far as natural language understanding is concerned in retail. Very good at finding new items and products and all that kind of stuff. And so maybe that's being used to enhance Siri's knowledge as far as product search is concerned. But you never really know. And so it'd be interesting from your perspective, if this isn't part of your kind of like, do not speak about this part of your contract, whether you have any, from the Vocal IQ side, like where did it end up in the end?
I think Vocal IQ has been really, really impactful, but as you point out, I can't really go into a lot of detail. Well, what I can say is that Apple is one of the most prolific acquirers, and it's an incredible product-focused company, right? If you think about voice assistants, right, and I think everything you said are all of those individual assumptions are really, really good. However, when you think about having a direct impact on a system as complex and mature as Siri, it's actually no simple feat to make an impact or to kind of like delineate where something else has been added to augment the functionality. I think that most of those acquisitions have been probably successes. I can't possibly comment, but it's when you think about just kind of like putting people towards improving those things, I like to think of the large voice assistants, like Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, a bit like aircraft. They're a bit like aircraft carriers, right? They're there to project power. They're there in case the whole world develops in that direction, and we're slowly seeing that it is, right? Like the consumer habits around first, voice assistants on mobile phones, but later with smart speakers, they've really ramped up. And consumers are ready to interact with this technology. 1 in 3 homes, if not more, at this point have an Alexa or a Google Home or another one of these smart speakers. And when you think about kind of like adding something to that aircraft carrier and how it's going to impact its performance, it will, and it impacts in many ways. There are a lot of good people who maybe find a different use, or a different thing, different problem to work on there where they can have higher ROI. But I can't really go into much more detail, but yeah.
I didn't think so. I thought I'd try my luck anyway, but you never know. So you spoke there about, well, I'll get into that question in a minute, actually. So you were at Apple for a while, and then you went and created PolyAI. What was it specifically that kind of took you in that direction? What was it either that you were noticing wasn't working, either not necessarily at Apple, but broadly speaking in voice technology? What was it that you thought wasn't quite right, and what problem did you think you could solve by creating PolyAI?
Absolutely. So that's a good question. I think that it has nothing to do with Apple. I think the challenge of creating a voice assistant that will interact with people through any of these mediums, right? Be it a mobile phone or a smart speaker, it's a different thing. It's a different product. That product has many use cases. The definition of quality and whether it's good is very different to different people. It's unclear what they need to do. What's clear, though, is that the ROI has been tremendously negative, but we're kind of like, borrowing from the future and investing, right? Because if, say Amazon charged enough to have positive ROI on every, Echo Dot and whatnot, when you aggregate over the fact that there are 15,000 people working at Alexa, you actually, as a technologist and as someone who worked on this before, it was as huge and as popular as it is today, you can't help but think that we've not achieved that much when, like the few top scenarios that you do with any of these kind of like sets of technologies is playing music, setting alarms and timers, asking a few questions when playing board games, navigation, maybe texting, stuff like that. But, overall, it's really not that overwhelming. There was a hope that, this would be the next thing after mobile. Not really. It's kind of growing. It's growing at the rate that, say, laptops grew in the 90s, and they grew, right? And compound interest is miraculous. And at the end, we're all sitting here with a laptop. But it's definitely not exploded in the way that, say, the iPhone did, even though I think many of these companies hoped that it would. And now you hear these very articulate narratives around, like, is it going to be the new gateway to shopping? Is it going to be, is it really going to materialize when we have AR and VR? Likely. Those are all things that will build into it. It's not yet clear where, how, and what. Now, when you condition for the fact that I care about this technology, my co-founders do, our whole senior research team, we were all brought up by a guy called Steve Young. Steve is a legendary Cambridge professor, polymath, one of a kind. The guy had worked on speech recognition for years, was the leading person pushing hidden Markov models, which were the one and only way you did speech recognition until deep learning, got in. And really, as a method, they're not much worse than deep learning still. And they were a more kind of like data efficient method previously. Steve was the pro vice chancellor of Cambridge. He sold 3 companies, one to Google, one to Microsoft, one to Apple. And he, assembled this team that since 2006 worked on building dialogue systems, right? And if you kind of like harken back to 2006, speech recognition error rates are at 20, 30%. It is impossible to imagine that you could have a sophisticated conversation with that system. But what Steve started developing is a formalism that, models these errors and finds ways to recover, to ask questions, to disambiguate, to really bring context into the understanding bit so that you're able to really elevate that level of performance. And that's something we're really good at. I did a PhD on that, the problems called dialogue state tracking. A few other people in the company did, and there are similar problems later in the conversational pipeline, like dialogue management, deciding what to say, depending on both the uncertainty of what the user might have meant and the shape of the world, say what's available in a shop inventory or in a reservation book, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, when you think about like what has been built and where you can do good science to make sure that you make rapid progress, the most kind of like isolated problem that as good scientists we decided to focus on is customer service. A few reasons. There's a lot of data. There's a genuine consumer need, right? And like an enterprise need to kind of like handle all of these calls. And interestingly, I like to say back at the time of Vocal IQ, you can go into a large enterprise, speak to the people in charge of customer experience, to the people in charge of the bottom line, to the CIOs, and they'll have a really, in-depth conversation with you about the art of the possible. And if you had done this before, every other home had an Alexa, they would have laughed you out of the room, right? and rightly so, right? It's a bit of a ridiculous idea. But where we've had a lot of success over the past few years is really in pushing out systems that are incredible. They're like some of the most sophisticated, like top 10 voice assistants ever deployed. Narrow domain, right? They're not there to talk to you about anything. They definitely cannot talk to you about the meaning of life. But, you want to book a table and you really, or, you want to schedule a piano lesson and it's on a Tuesday or a Thursday evening, but not after 10. Like, we can do that kind of stuff. And that's really complex stuff. But the more important thing about doing customer service is you're actually then able to evaluate how well the system is working, right? and how happy people are interacting with that system. So there are two levels, like, do they get the job done? And then the second problem is, like, how frustrated does it leave users compared to speaking to a really good human? And, we choose our battles, but we're able to outperform the best human agents quite often. And if we think we can't, we probably won't really go into that application just yet until we're ready.
How do you mean by outperform humans? In what respect would it outperform a human?
Yeah, so that's a complex question, right? On the one hand, just reaching the kind of like key characteristics of a support agent that are human and then make them popular are things like, say, the quality of voice, the speed of response, the quality of the understanding, knowing what the user means, right? And those are all engineering and scientific constraints where in these more narrow applications, we're able to do really well, right? Now, when you think about outperforming humans, if I say that my last name is Mrkšić, like that doesn't work with, English speakers who are not you, right? And if I quickly say that my postcode is EC1M5PY, was that Mike or November for the fourth character? God knows. Turns out that it's actually, and it's no surprise, right? It was just a matter of time. But now we're able to outperform, say, humans when it comes to natural language, say alphanumeric input, to understanding colloquialisms, to understanding really complex questions. And the other thing to really take into account, and this sounds like I'm just beating the baseline, but there are very few call centers that are staffed so well with people who have been there for long enough to know all the procedures, right? So if you've got a very complex product where there are 200 questions about it, like an AI can just access them all and answer those questions, even if the answer just changed, because it's they're the Borg, right? They have all the answers. They're connected to a central system, and the answer changes. They know immediately, right? They outperform people because they pick up straight away. They don't get tired. They speak whatever language you need them to, right? You switch language sentence to sentence, and the agent can change the language they speak. So there are many parameters in which we as humans are flawed, right? Like we speak up to a few languages. We don't know all the answers. We will struggle to understand postcodes, and with many of these problems, we can actually have, somewhat transactional but really incredibly functional voice assistants take the place of those human agents.
Interesting. You've mentioned it a couple of times so far. Sophisticated conversations. And then you kind of said, you use that example of book me a table for Friday at 8, whatever it might be. Not vegan, but less than 14, whatever it might be. Like, so is that what you would classify as a sophisticated conversation, those kind of compound queries, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it, right? If you get someone, I've heard examples of calls that are system took where someone would say, let's say that's less of a digital native and maybe someone who's not as versed in speaking with these assistants, and you can hear sentences like 3 to 4 people. I'm hoping for. I think no, I'm not 3 to 4, right? Like that's an adversarial example if there ever was one, right? So kind of like understanding those things. That's quite sophisticated on a technical level, right? So compound things, but more importantly, like the long sentences, questions that are contextual, that depend on what has already been answered, right? And like really being able to just kind of like, respond to a question with the full context of the conversation, right? So if someone, had previously specified that they want, a table outside, and they ask you about disabled access, your venue might actually have, say a disabled toilet that's outside, right? Or maybe very close to the exit. And you should provide that information rather than the more generic, like, we've got disabled access around the restaurant.
How we'll maybe get into some of the details around the PolyAI technology, but how kind of do you approach that level of management? So in the past, when I've worked on things, it's a lot of saving everything that the user responds, and then later on in the conversation doing a bunch of checks to see what they've responded to previously, and then a lot of if this then that kind of things to point them in the right direction of the conversation. Is that the way you approach it? And if so, how does the technology that you have make that process kind of easier, or do you approach that in a totally different way?
Yeah, so I mean, if there's a complex process, there's really no like silver bullet that will absorb that process and turn it into something that the agent just inherently knows, right? Now, but if you think about, if you think about the process of just encoding it all, right now with our clients, we work as a managed service, right? So we have a team that will actually go and understand what those processes look like, and we'll build stuff that is, at least 80% very, easy to represent visually, so that our clients can go and edit that thing. So it's a bit of a Salesforce, like Sales Cloud style delivery model where we'll configure it for you, we'll build the first version, and then you can go and maintain it, right? And there's a trade-off, right? When you look at the simple DIY tools like Dialogflow, Microsoft Bot Framework, Plex. You can build demos quickly, but it's really hard to even capture those complexities, even if you're willing to put in the work, because it just kind of like blows up, and at the end it looks like a very complex map of a subway, and it gets really hard to maintain, to update, to even see what's going on. And
very easy to break as well, isn't it? Change one thing, the whole thing will come crashing down.
Yeah, absolutely. It's house of cards, and if you build it that way, you continue to kind of like throw bodies at the problem. It gets ever more complex. You're kind of like waging war on complexity, and at some point you're going to give up, because the cost of just maintenance is really high. And what we are trying to do is just like expose 80% of the things in a way that's a lot neater, right? Where kind of like some of the kind of like processes are encoded as data flow, right? Where it's kind of like, this will trigger if this are correct. Some things are global rules. And then for some other things, there is your traditional control flow, like if this, then that. But, we try to kind of like in the initial build, create something that is a lot more robust to that exponential explosion of the number of states. We plan to release this platform to all of our clients towards the end of Q2, early Q3. It's kind of like an early trials right now. It's a problem, an engineering and a scientific problem. It's actually more of an engineering problem that's not yet been solved, right? And we know way too much about the problem to just be another, hey, we built a graphical tool, you should build it because it's better, because lines are easier to draw. Like, that's stupid, right? We know way too much about it to be that naive. So we're trying to take, we've taken a long time to actually say, okay, there will be a platform at all, right? Because if you look at the historic, approach to voice, and voice is very different from text. And, I don't know, like for your audience, how interesting it is for me to kind of like drill into that a bit more. But, I think we're seeing chatbot building tools now that are approaching a shape where they're good enough for an enterprise that's willing to throw 100 bodies at the problem, build a chatbot that's okay. But voice is just a lot more complex because A, it doesn't work that well. B, you need to kind of, I see one of the comments, I don't know why people insist on modeling conversations with flowcharts. Well, they do that because the appeal of it is that, everyone in today's world of like software platforms wants to win overnight. So if only I build a slightly better looking flowchart than everyone else, then the whole entire world will come and build amazing dialogue systems, better than Siri, better than Alexa, better than anything, because my UI is so good. I mean, that's like, just like, okay. Like if you think that, go ahead and build another flowchart. All we need is, one color flip to make the user experience a bit better. And, everyone will build a Siri in their backyard. But yeah, I agree with the sentiment. Like in a way, like for a very simple kind of like system where you want to build a demo and go through like 3 sentences where you behave exactly the way you expected yourself to behave. Yeah, you can do that with Dialogflow, right? You want to build something that's robust that you can kind of like give a heavy beating or have someone come in without knowing how to interact with it and survive robustly. Well, that's not how it's gonna work, right? And whether we can even create something I mean, the analogy I like to think about here is think about the web in the 90s, right? We had maybe one website, then we maybe had another, and over time we built a few good websites. We saw what the limitations vis-a-vis technology were, so we built better technology. One day we had HTML5 and whatnot, many other things. I don't know enough about the web to give an analogy that's kind of like interesting enough. But one day we built Squarespace, right? Before that, we had WordPress, right? We had things that could fit out relatively generic versions of websites that were pretty good, right, for a certain purpose. And you think about the shape of voice assistants, right? If you remove chatbots, and this largely applies to chatbots as well. It's like, how many really good voice assistants are there? How many people swear by Alexa or Siri? Well, very few still, despite the fact that, if you do a bit of a back of the envelope calculation, Amazon probably spends $5 billion a year on Alexa. It's still not something that is incredible, right? Like this thing was incredible on like day one. It was amazing, right? And then I think, people are hooked and they want to have like an app store and they want to have people building because that's how the ecosystem explodes. It's not happened. It's likely not going to happen that fast, right? So for us as practitioners in the field, for whom it's not negotiable whether we're going to do this or not, this is our life. We care about it. We'll be doing it for decades to come, right? The only way to do it then is to go and attack the same market that companies like, say, Nuance and IPsoft were addressing previously. But if you think about those companies, they would work only with the largest of companies because their ability to handle the start of the conversation, like, hey, what's your call about? Who do I need to reach you to? Maybe I can like learn a bit about you before I pass you on. Like, that's not a large part of the conversation. And if you're only saving that small amount of time, well, then you better go after only the largest of call centers. Now, at this point, like we're standing on a lot of work that happened over the past 5 to 10 years. We're able to build things that are a lot better. And, we can go a lot deeper in that conversation. We can build experiences that are actually not frustrating at all. Okay? And another big piece of our technology, and this is also Steve's legacy, is just like modeling the confidence of the system and knowing when, we're not doing that well. If we're not doing that well, we should just stop, right? Because that's kind of like, we're very cowardly around how fast we hand off. Because, for this thing to be really adopted, it should just be a net positive over an existing call center, right? It's not a cost-cutting play. Like, with one of our clients, we're increasing revenue by around 4 to 6% because we're adding so much elastic, flexible, superhuman labor that, like we're adding so much flexible workforce in times that matter that it has really positive ROI. And having, a human workforce at the ready of a comparable size and capabilities would be incredibly costly and would have a negative ROI. With other clients, we're doing marketing related things where, we're upping sales for things that would not otherwise be, again, possible with a human estate, maybe because those calls need to happen in a certain time period, right? So there are a lot of places where these systems can do a lot, but, you need to be pretty deliberate around how you're playing.
Interesting. So there was an awful lot in that. So one, there's 3 different ways we could go about this. One, I think it would be nice to continue that tooling discussion because I think your eyes lit up when you were talking about that. So I think I've got another question about that. You mentioned stuff around the app ecosystem. Everyone wants it to be the next app ecosystem, and that's not going to happen, and it hasn't happened. So that's another area that would be nice. And then you finished up talking about modeling system confidence, and more robust conversation management. So those 3 areas I think are useful. But if we go back to the tooling side of things, you have this technology, and we'll get into a little bit more detail about that in a moment. So you have this technology. You're building experiences for clients. You're targeting enterprise, you're targeting kind of like contact centers, customer service, but now you have aspirations to make it a more kind of accessible piece of kit, basically. And so, I've used and tested a lot of different versions of either design tools or publishing tools or platforms, whatever you want to call it, from Dialogflow, ES, and Watson, which are a little bit more kind of like bare bones, to your likes of CX rather, which is a little bit more graphical, to your likes of Cognigy or Boost, which is graphical with a little bit more kind of power or flexibility around the input in terms of the ASR and NLU and stuff. And then you've got things that are purely just design tools like VoiceFlow and BotMock and Bot Society and things like that. So you've got this kind of a bridge between, and then you've got other tools actually that exist. VoiceXP have got one. I know TalkVia are releasing one soon, which is a little bit more kind of like, it's almost like form filling. Voicify, very similar. Form filling. You fill in a few fields, you add some images and some multimodal chip suggestions, whatever it might be, and then it creates a conversation from it. So the way I would kind of, if I was to describe the tooling landscape, you've got on one side, you've got code, write it all yourself. Then above that, you've got something similar to Watson Dialogflow ES, where there's at least some web-based interface you can input stuff into, but it's still some code sitting behind it for the logic and stuff like that. Then you've got something that is probably more akin to, let's say, Dialogflow CX, where you've still got your and then maybe you put Cognigy in that group, which is getting to a little bit more drag and drop sort of stuff. You can start putting those graphical interfaces together. Then you've got something a bit more like VoiceFlow, which is similar kind of principle, but less control over the language model and all of the complexities that sit behind it. And then you've got the kind of form filling side of the tooling. Where within that scale do you think PolyAI will sit? Is it in between code and graphical user interface, or like, how do you get around the graphical user interface problem, I suppose, is the question. Where do you think the perfect tooling sits within that kind of scale?
It's really complex, right? You can't give up on the coding element fully, because we don't yet possess enough good abstractions to kind of like just create a fully graphical thing. I'd be betraying a lot of the things that we plan to release later this year if I went into a lot of detail. But I think that you need to have like a certain level of graphical design that lets people continue to maintain the system after it's built. It's also like undeniable that if you just do that, you're not going to be able to model the right kind of complexity. What we believe in right now and what we do is, as I mentioned, a Salesforce style delivery model where we build the first version, because frankly, we can build, and we do build and deploy systems that are 100 times better than any of the platforms that you just listed, because they're not good enough, right? And like, I'll give you one example of why they're not good enough. Sorry, I'm just reading.
That's all right.
Yeah. So no, I think that like, if you think about just say speech recognition, which is an essential thing for voice, like a lot of the companies you mentioned, they're really still all about chat, right? In fact, I'd say that there is no voice first developer tool or a platform for deploying voice assistants for customer service, or even for deploying voice assistants. They're trying to straddle both things, but because of just the interest and the simplicity of doing chat, they end up doing chat. And they're focused on chat, and they think about chat first. We think about voice, right? And for voice, the actual reason why, say, a company like Nuance is still very powerful is that they configure speech recognition for your application enough so that, in the end, what they can deploy, even though their, say, generic speech recognizer is not better than Google's, they're still able to actually do the homework around making sure that speech recognition has been tailored to your application. And hence, it's very good. And hence, they still have like a lot of clients, especially at the top end. When you look at all of these platforms, they're just trying to simplify it. And, if you think about the teams working on these things in a Google or, say Amazon, etc., a lot of the top researchers, people who actually have a lot to say and have done a lot of work on creating the latest generation of dialogue systems, they don't really want to work on this problem because it's a different problem. It's a tooling problem, right? And it's like, we shouldn't pretend it's easy, right? finding the right abstractions so that you expose this technology to an exponentially larger audience, it won't come overnight. So you can kind of like, try to build Wix.com back in 95 over and over and over again. Maybe you'll get there, maybe you won't. Or you build really good websites that you gradually make more configurable, and then you have a few templates. And they'll do some things, we'll do some things, but we'll release our voice platform, kind of like late Q2, early Q3 this year, and then maybe we can have this conversation again, and probably get someone who is still very technical, unlike me, to kind of like talk you through it. Perhaps our VP of Product, Vincent, or our CTO, Sean.
That sounds good. That's a good approach. I like that incremental approach, because I think that with everything, not just in conversational AI, everything in general these days is rushed, isn't it? No one's got any time. Everyone wants to rush things to market. Everyone wants to kind of put an MVP out or democratize things quickly. I mean, we use this maturation scale for trying to determine where organizations sit in their kind of transformation journey as far as conversational AI is concerned, from like a embryonic stage where you're thinking about it, to crawling, to walking, to running, and then there's a part of it which is relay, which is where once you've established yourself a center of excellence and you've established processes and standards and you've got a consistent way of delivering quality and you've defined that quality, then you might be in a position to start thinking about democratizing, start thinking about devolving. But you really need to have your house well and truly in order before you do that. Whereas a lot of these tools are already thinking about democratizing. I'm not saying democratizing is a bad idea, because you've got a lot of talented designers, a lot of talented writers who can create some really impressive stuff. So I don't think it's democratization that's the issue. It's more of a case of, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's essentially, I don't know whether it's a rushing basically to try and democratize before maybe some of the fundamentals have been figured out. I don't know if that's a more accurate way of describing it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's just like, there are a lot of good, ambitious people that just want to win, right? And, I don't think that this is a battle that will be played out over the next 2 years. I think there's a lot of work to be done. And, there's also just like that consumer adoption that is happening in kind of like, the, households where people speak to Alexa, etc. There's still a lot that we need to prove before people kind of like go into a conversation with a voice agent and expect that it can do all of these things, right? And people just need to see more success stories there. And we have a few, we'll have a lot more, and we're in it to win it as well. But I think that it's going to be a marathon and not a sprint.
It's a good way of describing it. You mentioned there around the whole superhuman element of this and creating robust conversations. But by that, do you mean, because you mentioned that when you were talking about the graphical user interfaces and how it's easier to kind of break them as such. When you say robust conversations or superhuman conversations, are you talking about the getting rid of those limitations that some of the graphical tools might have, whereby once you're in a certain part of that tree, you're pretty much stuck and you have to say what the system expects you to say to get out of it? Are you talking about more fluid conversations, or how could you describe that?
Absolutely, right? Like if I'm talking to you and like you're helping me book, let's go with restaurant reservations, because they're like the ultimate kind of like hello world thing when it comes to dialect systems, right? It's like, I'm like, Kane, I'd love to come in tonight, and I'm coming in with my fiance, and I'm vegetarian. Like, boom. Actually, no, never mind. Actually, we're coming in with 2 more people. And then like, oh no, sorry, did I say tonight? I meant tomorrow, right? And like you do that with any system built with those flowcharts, it's possible that it works, but someone killed themselves to support it, and they probably did it after it failed a few times. And there's like this code or like a visualization hanging here and hanging there and hanging there. None of it is reusable. It doesn't react well to mistakes or whatever. And then there's the more kind of like, when I say robust, I also mean like, we all talk differently, right? If you're like, chipmunk Serbian guy like me who just talks fast, slurs words, non-native accent, and maybe I say like 3 people, right? And you're like, how many people? 3 people. How many people? 3 people. It's like, it's not working. Mix it up, right? Like mix it up on a design level, right? But also like look deeper into that like speech recognizer output. It's like, well, it may be 3. He's repeating it. It's probably not what I'm saying here, right? And that's like just something that's inbuilt into our system. And like the automatic ability to use context is incredibly important, right? Because it stops, it's like an autopilot element for, driving on a straight road is a bad example. But it's just like, it lets you not do that amount of time crafting. And, we're culling it by a factor of 2 with each of these things that we add. And if you don't do that, it's not even a matter of handcrafting. Like, this just doesn't work with things like that. Like, you can't do it. There's nothing you can do. Right? And like, if you don't do it, then you're just losing a lot of people.
Interesting. How much? Because if you look at a live chat, or you look at a live call, you do get a lot of that kind of long-winded explanations of things, like when you get put through to someone on the phone and they say, how can I help you? And I catch myself doing it now because I've worked with this kind of technology. I catch myself when I make this phone call. So I'll phone up something like Virgin and I'll complain about my internet. And the customer service agent will say, how can I help? And I'll start at the very beginning. I'll say, well, last Tuesday, I was trying to log on to work and I tried to get my emails. And for some reason, I couldn't get into my emails. And I was wondering why. So I tried the BBC website. That wasn't working. And then my wife was complaining about Netflix not working. And so I went in, I had to reset the router. So I tried resetting the router and that didn't work. And so I've turned off the TV, turned it back on again, unplugged it and all that kind of stuff. And still the internet's not working. I've been 4.5 hours now. I've reset the router 2 times and unplugged that and plugged that back in again. It's still not working. So what do I do now? And so all of that, basically all I'm saying is my router's not working.
I can't name the client, but it is one of the largest European telcos, and that is exactly what we do with them. It's a bit of a different conversation to say that, kind of like, quintessential, say, appointment making, that we also do with some clients. If you think about router troubleshooting, someone's calling it and they are pissed, right? Like, they do not want, like, yeah, you'll give the full context to a human because you want them to know all of these things. And if it's an automated thing, you're going to flip. You're like, what? I don't know. Like, so to buy back time, to buy a bit of your goodwill, like, I better sound really professional and like I really know what I'm doing. Because, like, say a very good agent might say, like, okay, hold on. Like, did you restart your router? Okay, no, yeah, okay. Which router do you have? Do you know? And you're like, how the hell do I know? Right? Well, you probably know, but like most people don't, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, like, does it have a gray strip across the hub? Does it have a plastic band on the bottom? Okay, well, that's that kind of router, right? So that's what our systems do. They're very assertive, and they kind of like very quickly just do very interactive and robust form filling, right? But not form filling of the kind like, tell me. Okay, now you go to the agent. It's like there's like an agent-led conversation and there's a user-led conversation. Typically, in terms of pushing the limits of technology, user-led conversations are difficult because God knows what you're going to say, right? But if you think about surviving in these kind of like low oxygen settings, like low goodwill settings where people are really frustrated, you have to provide value quickly. You can't talk for a long time. And people today, when they think about technology and their words, like really, really bad words, like deflection, containment, right? It literally sounds like you're building, kind of like a tower defense game where you're defending against the creeps coming in. And we don't like when people think about consumers that way. We think that we can help them a lot, and we can just like help the call center as well by kind of like helping them talk to each other more efficiently, or not at all if we can help with the problem, right? So you take control of that conversation. Snappy, short sentences, very directed, very guided. Don't baby people. Don't repeat them. Don't thank them for their call 5 times for pity's sake, right? And it's like these systems and the way that people build it is just obnoxiously bad, right? It's like, they have very long sentences, repetitions, and they, like long introductions, explanations of the fact that it's an automated agent. Like, if I call in and it's an automated agent that's better than a human, I don't want to hear a 3-sentence disclaimer that I am an automated agent, but we really care about your call. Like, just make sure that this automated agent, if you're gonna, make me suffer with it, make sure that it shows me its worth really, really quickly, or get it out of the way. And that's what we do, right? It's not about like deflection and containment, because frankly, we don't like to engage in deals where it's just about cost cutting. Obviously, you could do it. You could deteriorate the experience further and make it dirt cheap for companies. And we've spoken to a lot of people, a lot of enterprises to do just this. And we tend to find that we can't do a lot for them because at the end of the day, AI is still a bit of a luxury product. If you want to melt down the experience, you build a DTMF IVR system, right? And you let people find their way through the labyrinth. And if it takes 10 minutes, well, it's their 10 minutes, not your 10 minutes, right? But yeah, we don't do that. Like we really go in and work only with clients where there is kind of like a mutual understanding that we're here to improve the CSAT score by say 40%, which is something that we've been able to do. And sometimes it's because the agent is superhuman and it's really able to do a lot of those things well. And frankly, a lot of it is just the fact that it's there in endless quantities, always available, speaking different languages, and just alleviating a lot of the operational hurdles that a call center manager has to deal with that are the main constraint and the barrier to providing a really good customer experience.
Interesting. What kind of, because that's a difficult thing to get around that, because that is a lot of what a lot of organizations are trying to do, is because they've been overwhelmed, because they're kind of run off the feet. They've got agents working from home. Some they might have had to furlough or what have you, make redundancies because they, haven't been doing so great. So you've got companies who are trying to manage excess demand, I suppose.
Mhm.
So phones run off our hook. So the agent is then used to soak up the demand. So they're not getting rid of staff. They're not trying to save costs. They're trying to just cater for more, do more. But then you do have those companies who are really trying to think about cost savings and really trying to think about, obviously the contact center is a cost center. There's always things being done in that space to try and reduce costs and stuff like that. And so isn't that though one of the main drivers for people wanting this kind of technology is to try and reduce costs?
We don't find that it's the main driver because purchasing decisions, like in the Maslow hierarchy of buying software, cost cutting is like a very sound one, but it's not something that people like to just inherently. I don't think that it's the most exciting thing that people like to work on, right? So for us, really, it's much more about number one, CX improvement, right? And that will have to do with companies that want better CX. They're already spending a decent amount of money. Like they're unable to spend more. Maybe they can spend a bit more, but they want to see an outsized return compared to, say, growing the call center or buying call center software, which could help as well, right? But like AI is now at a point where like the balance of power has tilted, and we're able to just do a lot more for parts of their customer service estate. And then if you think about just sorry, I got distracted reading what the comment. When you think about the second aspect, it's revenue generation, right? And sometimes operational efficiencies, but more operational efficiencies along the lines of we don't have enough labor. We need like burst labor in such volumes. Like say, we work with hospitality groups. In fact, when the lockdown finally lifts, you'll find that probably 1 and 2 large restaurant groups are already users of PolyAI, right? And we help them drive really good returns. And it's because a lot of the calls going into restaurants are missed, but the user behavior on calling to book is persistent. In fact, for the last 10 years, it's been 50-50 of like calling versus not calling, be it online, mobile, whatever, for making reservations, and it's stable, right? It won't go away anywhere. Like I call to book, right? And I'm hardly not a digital native. So with those clients, we're just able to give them that infinite supply of labor using AI, and that's also a piece of around being superhuman.
That's good. How much of that do you think, we've touched on this before, how much of that do you think will just become templatized and just universally accessible in terms of like a restaurant booking? There's a very particular pattern that occurs in that, and it doesn't really matter necessarily what kind of restaurant you are. It's like there are certain things that you need to know: what branch, what time, how many people. How much of those things do you think ultimately will just be repeatable and scalable and ultimately over time kind of do I want to say commoditized? I don't know if commoditized is the right word, but maybe it is. But how kind of scalable do you think those things are?
I mean, I don't know if scalable is the right question there, right? Like, I think that those things will be everywhere. Yeah, I think that they will be commoditized, I guess. Yeah. We already work with so many restaurant groups that there's definitely a need. The really interesting thing that happened earlier this year is we had, and we have a blog post about it. Google Duplex called one of our systems, and they had a really, really awkward conversation. Well, not awkward. It was actually a pretty cool conversation. Like we started, Duplex was quiet. Like, hey, are you there? Duplex was quiet. Then Duplex started talking. They promptly, first our system informed Duplex that the call was being recorded. Then Duplex told us that, like, I'm an automated service. This call will be recorded. Like, they didn't really, there was no moment of like, Dr. Livingston, I presume, where they kind of said like, okay, we're just going to do this with APIs because why the hell are we using this like low channel thing called human language to communicate?
Yeah.
And if you think about it, there's just like an operational difficulty around global like communication of things, right? This could have been an API call. Like there could have been a single portal, a Skyscanner like portal. In America, say OpenTable is much more dominant than anything specifically in Europe is. And, it could have all been done with API calls, but hey, we've lived to see two highly sophisticated voice assistants having a conversation about opening times in restaurants so that they can update something in Google Maps, right? And I think that's going to happen more and more and more, right? And the thing working for us here is that, the empires like Google have worked to provide these assistants as, kind of like, helpful assistance to consumers all around, right? And they're intended to speak to humans, but there's no need for them to do that if we kind of like provide the interface on the opposite end. Human language is universal, and like API calls are not. And like there are many, many places where we've just been unable to agree standards around, what's acceptable from one place to another. Like you look at COVID and vaccination right now, and are Americans going to recognize Chinese vaccines? Is the European Union going to recognize Russian ones? They all tend to work and prevent heavy cases of COVID. But, we disagree. We have our own quirks. We have our own kind of like problems with each other. And we always, have these kind of like problems agreeing a universal interface. And I think that voice assistants are actually a really good way of dealing with that because they can actually overcome these things.
That's interesting. Earlier on, you mentioned containment and deflection. And that's, funnily enough, last week, that's something that I posted about, which is why containment rates are the wrong things to be thinking about. And so I'm curious about when you are working with clients, when you're standing up these bots, how do you mentioned customer service or CSAT scores or improving customer experience. So maybe that's one metric, but what things are you using to determine whether something is successful? What metrics are you trying to get to prove how successful an implementation has been?
Yeah. So, like, I think the one really kind of like salient thing is like NPS scores, CSAT scores, first call resolution, all of the contact center metrics, right? Because in a way, like you're providing, augmented additional labor for a call center, right? So you should use those same metrics, right? The second thing is like it's akin to first call resolution. It's like the resolution rate, right? Like does the AI work? Did you have to hand off to a human, right? Then the other useful thing just operationally is like the reduction in average handling time, right? Containment, if you're using it only really to measure whether you've been able to achieve the task rather than did you keep the person on the line until they gave up, that's the wrong metric, right? That's where containment is a really, really bad word. But if you're just looking at the first call resolution, well, that tends to really correlate with NPS scores, and something that like you should absolutely look at, even if you don't have a single AI agent in your call center.
We've got a question from Michael, getting into the realms of kind of being proactive, I suppose I would read this as. I'm not going to bring it up because he's mentioned that he's got any problems with the internet, so it's quite a chunky paragraph. But essentially, the question is, are you able to predict why your customer is calling to create a more real-time contextualized conversation?
Yes.
Is that something that you do?
Yes. So a few ways to do this, right? Um, if you actually have the information from the backend, and that's like the other piece that is less of an exciting conversation when it comes to kind of like B2B and customer service automation, but it's about the integrations, right? If I can tell that there's an outage in your area or something like that, the agent should go and say, "Hi, Kane. Thanks for your call. Just wanted to let you know we expect to have problems in your area around 8 p.m. Are you calling about slow internet? Yeah, we can do that if we have that information.
Mm.
If not, then it's really about like how much of the information do we have, right? If you say that your internet is slow, we're like, what's your postcode? Tell us your postcode. We're seeing outages. That's something that's probably available, even if the kind of like more kind of like direct information isn't immediately. But yeah, I mean that's exactly like that's a part of being superhuman, right? Like do these things to not kind of like get someone to go through a long set of questions around. Have you restarted your router? Have you done this? Have you done that? Are you sure that there aren't people connected to your internet? Blah blah blah. So yeah, like what we tend to do in those calls is just like, well, tell us what have you done so far, right? And if they've like say restarted the router, we're not going to get them to do that. If they've done other things, we're not going to go through those steps, and it just kind of like avoids that roboticness that you sadly often experience even when you call a real call center because a lot of like the few people on the AI side think about this, but like the churn in call centers can be huge. Like I've been to call centers where churn is 200% a year, right? And you can imagine how hard it is to train people to bring, a high level of training to every agent in there. So the truth is, being superhuman sometimes isn't that hard because we've got 2% of the population working in customer service in the UK, in the US, in some countries it's even higher, right? And they're typically minimum wage jobs and it's hard to get people to do these jobs for a long time because in a way you're sitting there and people are shouting at you day and night for something that is really not your fault, right? So people tend to quit and they don't tend to stick in these jobs very very often, or for a very long time. So if you can bring in like a centralized agent that has seen all those problems that can predict that with 80% chance it's this problem. So let me try that, even though I might not have all the information I need to go there. That's being superhuman. That's kind of like pattern matching where a good human, well, like all humans are good, but like a well-trained human could have that kind of like intuition after some time. The automated agent can as well, but kind of like a human who's not well trained will struggle to do this.
Interesting. So that's a good narrative, this superhuman thing, and I think that's probably what we'll label this podcast when we actually publish it on the podcast. Because I think it's quite it summarizes most of the discussion that we've had. Like, so you spoke about superhuman being things like being able to scale the workforce and provide, access to a speaking thing that can do things for your company when other people can't do it. We have spoke about it being able to handle complex dialogues and situations and understand speech where humans might not be able quite to do that. We've spoke about being able to be proactive in understanding why someone might be calling. We've spoke about being able to be consistent over time forever rather than having the churn in the contact centers that exists. And so is there any other qualities that define the superhuman like capabilities that you're working with and so proud of PolyAI?
For sure. So with some of our clients, we're working on rollouts in multiple languages at once. So that's just like a very superhuman thing, right? Like you switch to French, Spanish, Mandarin, Russian, Serbian, boom, like here we go, right? And that's something that no human will ever be able to do as easily, right? So that's really cool. There are other aspects like different dialects, right? Like throw in this is why a lot of people wrongly think that say people in the UK are racist, so they have a problem with Indian call centers, right? The truth is, you get like the UK has like 67 dialects, right? And as someone who moved to to the UK, like I struggled and I learned English from the age of 3, right?
Mm.
And if you just think about like Brits are very good with each other's dialects, right? But like you bring in even a native English speaker from another country and they struggle, right? So like AI can actually like model every British, Australian, Kiwi, American, Canadian dialect and just like work really, really well and even adapt and just like respond in that dialect with colloquialisms, with everything. And a lot of people, say when they struggle to explain something to an offshore contact center agent, it's because some subtle cultural nuance isn't getting across. And AI will be able to do it, and like it learns from. We didn't talk much about technology, right? But like our agents are pre-trained on mountains of data. They've seen more data than any human ever will, right? So they're able to really understand language very quickly, to tune to specific, very complex scenarios very quickly because they've seen people write or speak in all manner of ways. And yeah.
Interesting. So where can people, if they if they want to find out more about Poly, if they want to kind of speak to you about helping them out, if they want to learn a bit more, what's the best way for them to do that?
Our website is the best way. You can hear a lot of the kind of like product demonstrations on the website. Our blog has a wealth of information around both how we think about customer experience, customer service, about AI, and if you go to poly.ai, we're polyai.com. You can read about all that and get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to kind of like hop on a call and see if we can help. But only if you want to improve customer experience.
Sounds good. That sounds good. And what about yourself? Where can people reach out to you or follow you online and follow your thoughts and all that kind of stuff?
Nikola at polyai.com, right? If you want to get in touch. Otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, but like I work a bit too hard to find the time to share my thoughts a bit more widely, at least for now. But anything PolyAI related, I'm all yours.
Cool. That's fantastic. And next week, is it next week? I don't even know what date it is. Not next week, but the week after. I'm involved, funnily enough, with PolyAI and taking part in the multilingual webinar that you have going on. So if you are interested in that, do check it out. It's polyai.com/multilingual-webinar. Looking forward to that. It's going to be interesting. Nikola, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been absolutely immense.
Thank you for having me. This was fun. I think we, you got me to say a lot about the tooling and some of the thoughts, and I really look forward to kind of like unveiling the platform to the world. And thank you for featuring superhuman elements so well.
No worries. Well, give us a shout when that platform's out, and we'll maybe jump on here and do it again, and we'll speak in a bit more detail about that and about why it's different to other platforms and your approach. It'd be good to get into a bit more of that detail. And also, you're on Clubhouse as well. So you said that you don't spend too much time messing around with social media, but hopefully we can drag you into Clubhouse at some point over the next couple of weeks and take a discussion over there as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Nice one. Cheers. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Tomorrow we're speaking to Ilan Avner of Audio Codes, and we're going to be talking about integrating your chatbots or voice bots into any contact center system, which is going to be interesting. And if you don't tune in next week, next Wednesday, same time as this, we're going to be speaking to Anthony Passimard of Google Contact Center AI, all about their tooling, which will be a nice compare and contrast, at least in the back of my mind after this discussion. It'd be interesting to learn a little bit more about that and how they're approaching things as well. So do join us for that, and do join us for the Poly webinar as well. Other than that, thank you very much for tuning in. As always, thank you also to